everyone. This is Rich Batista. Welcome to our first GEMA Talks of 2021. And I'm very excited to have with us today, and I will introduce her momentarily, Sarah Crennan from Yahoo Sports. She's the head of content at Yahoo Sports and has had a really interesting career in digital media and a lot of that in sports media and in the sports industry in general. So really interested to talk to her about some of the trends in sports and definitely how they've navigated through COVID, which I know has been a real interesting situation for them. And also she does color commentary for lacrosse, TV broadcast lacrosse games, which I'd love to hear more about that. And she was a student athlete at Georgetown. She played lacrosse all 4 years there. And so really interested to hear about her student athlete life there and how she ultimately got into sports. So Sarah, hello, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Rich. Thanks so much for having me. I'm
No,
excited to be here.
no, it's great to have you. And I thought we'd start just to kind of level set for the audience, if you wouldn't mind first giving people just sort of an update on Yahoo Sports and what Yahoo Sports is all about, and then also more specifically what your role is as head of content at Yahoo Sports. What does that mean?
Sure. As you mentioned, I oversee the content team for Yahoo Sports, which includes all of video production, all of our writers. And really what it comes down to is an amazing team of creators that all have a passion for sports storytelling. Our team has evolved quite a bit over the past year, both because of the pandemic, but also because of the emergence of legalized betting. Which presents probably the greatest opportunity we see going forward for revenue and fan engagement, most importantly. So, nobody expected 2020 to happen in the way that it did. It was a really, really hard year. Yep. But, now that we are through it, I'm so proud of what our team did, the way we continued to drive fan engagement and serve sports fans when live gameplay was paused and you couldn't find a score, you couldn't find a highlight. And so we really leaned on our creativity as a team to make sure that we were still an outlet away from the intensity of the news, which is what I think a lot of people saw and what a lot of people felt. Yeah. During that time, it was overwhelming. And so we really tried to bring sports entertainment across our products and experiences. And now that we're, through what is hopefully the worst of it, we've really shifted to thinking about the fact that we have always been a fantastic fantasy brand. Mm-hmm. And we have always been a great place for core sports coverage. Our strongest sports are the NFL and the NBA, and we have, really strong and amazing partnerships covering those sports. So how do we then transition into becoming a place where our content and where our product experience supports sports betting? As many people know, legalization is happening at the state level. So as states are legalizing sports betting, we are starting to think about, okay, how do we engage that market? What is the market opportunity? Starting with content experiences. And so bringing us up to today, core sports is incredibly important. Our fantasy business is incredibly important. But now we have this really fun challenge of thinking about getting the sports better through Yahoo Sports.
Yeah. So, you obviously have a lot of different partnerships across the sports industry. And I think one of the hallmarks of Yahoo Sports, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys are like number 1 or 2 in total audience, in terms of traffic each month? Or?
Yes, we are. Actually, I just got the ComScore data. We're the number 2 for this month, falling behind ESPN. But, that does kind of flip and go back and forth. And there are months where we've seen number 1.
So obviously the audience is a big differentiator for you when you're looking to do deals with content partners, including the betting partnerships that you've done. What are you what's the value proposition for Yahoo Sports, or what's the differentiators that make people want to be in business with Yahoo Sports? How do you guys sort of pitch it from the content angle that you run?
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, we just start with the fact that we are a trusted environment for your content.
Yeah,
always acknowledging the fact that we were one of the first internet companies, which comes with, you know, a strong perception. It also comes with kind of a legacy perception of, oh, you're old, or the audience we want is, you know, engaging, you know, on social or elsewhere. Now the hot thing's TikTok. So, you know, now we're trying to figure out how we get onto TikTok and all the emerging social platforms. But pushing those platforms to the side, Yahoo Sports is massive, and we can take your content, we can make sure it's delivered in a brand safe environment, and make sure that it also is amplified by a broader sports experience. And, you know, I give our product teams a lot of credit, because what they've built, I think, is truly best in class. You know, adding on our partnerships, I just mentioning the fact that we do have the NFL live games in both our core Yahoo Sports app as well as our Yahoo Fantasy app. And so we've seen, you know, really, really strong engagement, particularly around the pandemic, where fans want to come in and they want to watch their games. They want to read an article. They want to, you know, view a highlight. And they all want all of that experience in their mobile device. And so, you know, when we go to a partner, we're able to pitch this full story of the full experience that we bring to bear.
Yeah. And give our audience a little bit of a taste of some of the challenges you faced when COVID hit, because you guys do a lot of video production of your own and content creation of your own. So give us like an example or two of how you had to pivot or what you had to do to actually maintain your business day to day.
So the starting point for us is always, what is the biggest event that happened last night? Mm-hmm. What do we need to, when a sports fan wakes up in the morning, what do they need to see? What do they need to read? And what do they need to know? If you don't have games happening, you don't have that starting point. It forces a whole new way of thinking. And so we got to a point where not only did we not have live sports, but we weren't together in the same place. We were all, you know, trying to figure out how to, you know, make sure the guy outside, you know, wasn't yelling too loudly, or your kids weren't running down the hall. We're like, let's try to have a brainstorm, and then let's try to produce everything remotely. And it forced us to do some pretty cool things that I think wound up working. Like, we wound up creating a sports debate series where we debated what the best sports movie was, and we had, you know, kind of a 2v2 scenario, or what was the better movie, Sandlot or Major League? And it just kind of gave, you know, again, it gave people the outlet they needed. If you like sports, you were probably going to enjoy it in some way. And we, you know, started to think in that way of, you know, what's the surprise and delight element we can bring to our consumers for the day.
Yeah, no, it's, I can't imagine how, like you said, the biggest piece was, how do you do that? How do you create that day-to-day eventized content when sports aren't being played? So it sounds like you guys did some nice pivots. And I assume also, just from a technical standpoint, you must have come up with some new production techniques, or gave kits to people in their homes, things that you probably never had to do before, right?
Yes, and in many ways, I think constraint brought a lot of creativity for Yahoo Sports. For our fantasy football live show, we actually went to an entirely virtual set. And I was just notified today that it's a finalist for an FSWA award.
Oh, congrats. That's
so that's something that I really celebrate and I'm really proud of. I think it's a you know, great learning for the team that we were able to kind of fight through some real challenges and be innovative and, you know, embrace what technology could do to deliver the fan experience.
Mm-hmm. Good. You mentioned obviously sports betting, which is for those of us who work in and around sports, is obviously something that's been talked about for a lot of years. And like you said, the big trigger is going to be the legalization state by state. Just help us, the audience here, give us a vision of what that will look like. First of all, like, what are you exactly doing in sports betting? If I go to Yahoo Sports, what can I actually do, first off? And then tell us, like, 5 years from now, will people be betting in every state? Or like, help us understand a little of the vision of that.
Sure. So predicting the future is really hard, but I'll tell you that 5 years from now, I believe betting won't be a standalone experience. I think it will just become part of the conversation. So, what you saw in with the Super Wild Card weekend that the NFL put forward, you saw a main feed of the games, and then you also started to see some alternate broadcasts that covered the betting angles. I think that's the natural place for us to start as a business, but I actually think it will be collapsed into, hey, you love the game, you want the core coverage, but there may be more, betting tidbits, or there might be talk of prop bets, or how a big play may change the outcome of a game for bettors. Yeah. And so that's where I think we're going in 5 years. It becomes a more dynamic experience versus separate and distinct experiences. And so for Yahoo Sports, our starting point is to still cover events, with the same level of analysis and information that we always have, looking at players, team schemes, performance to date, all of the standard information we've always covered, but also, introduce betting concepts along the way. And I think education is something, when I think about our betting content, I make sure that education is kind of the first element guiding what we put into our content, because we're in a phase where we need to educate the audience around how do you bet, why should you bet, here's the stats, data, and information that may make you a good bettor. And from there, it's up to our users to make the decision to place that bet or not.
Yeah. What are some other trends, either in sports at large or sports media, that also make you, that have you on your toes in terms of what else do we need to deliver to our audience moving forward? What are other areas other than sports betting that you're thinking about, or how you position yourself, or how you distribute your content or present your content?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the next crop of audience, and we all kind of as an industry start to use those buzz terms frequently, like Gen Z. For a while it was millennials.
Right.
Now we're talking about Gen Z, and just how different they are in terms of comparing their fan experience to what mine might have been, or my father and mother's might have been. I grew up with games on all the time on the television, and many of a Gen Z audience may never have a traditional, cable subscription. And so what does that mean for how they're getting onboarded as a fan?
Right. That's a very important point. You're right.
Yeah. So how does that fan experience start? And in that way, they're starting with social, or they're starting with player interest, and building off of a player storyline. And that's really something that we've embraced. We've seen that cause matters a lot, that the crossover of sports and other topics matters a lot. Like, Gen Z wants to hear how athletes are using their voice for social justice, and how athletes are using their voice for politics, or for, race relations. And so it's really nuanced, because there is an aspect of our audience that believes sports should just stick to the core base. And so we find ourselves being very specific and intentional around how we cover a lot of topics, but also really mindful of the fact that we need to continue to grow, and that those trends are trends that we should pay attention to in what we put onto the site, and across anywhere you see our brand show up.
It's so true about, like, Gen Z. I mean, I have twin boys who are 16, and they don't watch whole games. Like, it's a much more short attention span. They're happy to watch a clip, on TikTok or Instagram right after the game ends. So, that has major effects on how what your relationship is like with that audience and that age group, I can imagine, and how you present, your content to them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think personalization and what we've done to personalize our content will really matter, because then your boys can come to Yahoo Sports and get the highlights just for the teams they've told us that they like, or for the sports they've told us that they like.
Yep.
And eventually, I think the deeper opportunity for more engagement will be around gamification.
Okay.
And that will go from casual free to play games all the way through somebody who is over the age of 18 and also more committed potentially as they better.
Yeah. Got it. So why don't we, I'd love to sort of go back here in the, this is your life, Sarah Crennan, and love to talk about your sort of experience going to Georgetown and your career journey after that. So you obviously big lacrosse player in high school, got recruited to Georgetown, but talk a little bit about your experience in selecting Georgetown and your experience. What was your experience like at Georgetown, both in general, but also maybe as a student athlete? I think people are interested to hear that too.
Sure. So I was born and raised in Annapolis, Maryland. Mm-hmm. I grew up about 2 miles from the U.S. Naval Academy, which was amazing. And my grandfather is a graduate of the Naval Academy, which, was a pretty cool experience to be a part of the culture surrounding the U.S. Navy, and had a massive amount of influence on me and who I am. But Annapolis is a big area for lacrosse. And when I was 6 years old, my babysitter gave me her old lacrosse stick. And my parents didn't know much about lacrosse, and I just kind of took to it. They signed me up for Pee Wee League. I played through the St. Mary's League. And to this day, my early coaches are people that stand out in my mind as having a huge influence, both because they were great coaches, but also because they made it so much fun. And,
don't always hear that. So that's good to hear.
It's just so important to remember that, sports are supposed to be about fun. And I loved it. Most of my best friends played lacrosse. It was my passion through college, through my time at Georgetown. So I did go through the recruiting process. That was an amazing experience, by the way, getting to see campuses and schools and kind of be there to feel the essence of what, what makes each of these universities different was just one of the highlights of my lifetime. So that was pretty cool.
Really unique experience.
Yes. And at the time, the University of Maryland women's lacrosse team was on a 7-year run of winning the national championship. Wow. And my senior year, my best friend was committed to Maryland and I was committed to Georgetown. And Georgetown and Maryland wound up playing in the national championship at Johns Hopkins University. Wow. And we went together and, we were sitting like this in the beginning. And it was a sudden death overtime game. By the end, we were like barely talking. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Maryland won, but it was just a matter of the coach and the team culture. Kim Simons Tortolani walked this amazing line of being intimidating as a person, but also so motivating and able to rally people to believe in our greater purpose. And it almost sounds cheesy, but she really, if you look at what she did in her span as the coach, it was so impressive. Taking us to two national championships and a Final Four.
Wow. Well, you were there too? Any of that when you were there?
We played in 2 national championships.
Wow.
Or yes. 1 national championship, 1 Final Four. Wow. The other national championship was my senior year of high school. So we won the Big East all 4 years. I mean, it just was so incredible to be part of that ride. So,
and how did you balance the student athlete piece? Because that must not be easy. You have to be unbelievably disciplined, I imagine.
Yeah, to be honest, I struggled at times. It was really hard. I had to work really hard at the schoolwork, and you're traveling constantly. You have to, if you're a minute late to practice, you're running, and so there's like the fear, the fear of having to run hills or run up the exercise stairs, which we did in fact do. So it was really hard. I think, freshman year was a pretty significant learning curve, but for any student athlete that's listening, once you get through that first year, you can do it. And you can keep going back, and you just kind of have to hold on and push through it as best you can. But once I got through freshman year, I had a sense of how to balance better.
And while you're at Georgetown, and as you came to the end of your 4 years there, what were you thinking career-wise?
I was so green. I mean, in high school, I always had this idea that I wanted to get a law degree and then, work in politics in some way and, influence decision-making on Capitol Hill. And I wound up, that's why I, went with the college. I was a government major, and I graduated and wound up working for a small lobbying firm. And I got the lay of the land. I started to learn a bit, but I also learned that I made the wrong choice. And I didn't really like politics.
You mean in terms of industry or company or both?
Industry. No, the company, no, the woman I worked for, I mean, she was incredible. And I actually, probably my larger takeaway was, she was somebody who was a woman and was founded her own lobbying firm at a time where you didn't see that a lot. And so watching her and her presence and the way she held herself, the way she negotiated, I probably learned more about, how to be a female executive from her. Like, that was probably my greater takeaway than anything else in politics.
Okay, so you're doing the job. I don't know how long into it you realized it wasn't the right industry, but what did you do next? Because you obviously broke into media, and why did you select media, and how did you break in?
Yes, so I wound up getting working with a recruiter in New York City, and I was looking at a wide range of jobs. I was a little all over the place, and I wound up getting an interview with the new CEO for AOL. And I was kind of tentative because the job was as an executive assistant. And, I was like 25 and thought I, had already done that in my life.
Right, of course, yeah.
But I was encouraged to go take the interview anyway. So I went, and I was expecting to meet with, layers of HR and then maybe like somebody else who worked, within the company. But I met with the CEO directly.
Yeah.
And
the CEO was Tim Armstrong, correct?
It was Tim Armstrong.
Yeah.
And Tim is he had so much energy, and he was so intently focused on what he was doing. There was something about the meeting where I was like, I want to work for that guy.
Right.
And I don't even care that I'm an executive assistant. I just want to work for that guy.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I found, a leader who was inspiring, and his story was pretty incredible. He was one of the early employees at Google, and then took this job to turn around AOL, and, spun AOL out from Time Warner, and took the company public. And so from there, it was like a roller coaster. And I got to see and do so much that at times it was unbelievable, what rooms I was in, what experiences I was having, just listening to some of the strategic decisions around, something like acquiring the Huffington Post or acquiring TechCrunch, or figuring out what our video solution was as, YouTube was really emerging and starting to grow. So I feel like I buried myself in my work. I had so much to learn, and I really learned a ton on the job.
Yeah, it's great. And obviously, given that you had been involved in sports and were a sports fan, was that sort of an area after your role with Tim was going to end at some point? Was that the area that you felt like you wanted to go into?
It was always the end, the goal kind of in the back of my mind. After I stopped working for Tim directly, I moved within AOL to our video business and our video division. So Tim had acquired a company called 5min, which was a video syndication network out of Israel, out of Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And they had a really amazingly smart, but also very intimidating leader who a lot of the people in the company were afraid of. So when I told him I wanted to go work for Ron Harnovo, I think he was kind of like, are you sure? But I loved him, and I loved his team, and I loved the culture. It was a startup within what was a kind of medium-sized company at the time. And I really learned the business of video and the business of content.
Yeah.
And I attribute, where I am today largely to that decision.
Right. And for those who don't know, you worked at AOL, and then for those who don't know, AOL and Yahoo merged and came together as one company. And so I assume that's how you then made the transition to Yahoo.
Yes. So I was on the BD and partnerships team when that acquisition actually closed, and it was delayed for a lot of reasons. So it was a weird time because we were in limbo. But it finally closed, and there was a new GM to lead sports, a guy by the name of Jeff Reese. And we were in a meeting actually talking about Sports Illustrated, who you might be familiar with, Rich. And And so don't get mad at me for what I'm about to say, but we were talking about Sports Illustrated, and they had just put Serena Williams in black lingerie on the cover. And I was like so angry. Yeah. Because I'm like, she is one of the best athletes of all time. Yep. And I don't know why you have to sexualize her. I don't understand. Like, why aren't we celebrating her accomplishments in a different way? Yep. And after that, Jeff was like, do you want to talk more? Like, should we go for a walk and maybe grab some lunch? And he was like, I think you should probably come over and work on sports. That's and I was like, that sounds amazing. What's the job? And he was like, I don't know, but we'll
figure it out.
Figure that out. And so really, that's how I got here.
Wow. Yeah. And talk a little bit about some of the, key characteristics for you think to be good at your job, or what makes someone like you successful in your job? What are some of the qualities you need? And obviously, I assume you possess, but you give a little idea on that.
Sure. I think to work in content, you just have to let the team believe that there is creative space. That there is permission and freedom to try, and at times to fail. Yeah. Like it's really hard to break through, and the media space is so crowded, and it's scary to create something and put and attach your name to it and then put it out into the world. And so I try to figure out what the team is really good at, what stories we want to tell, and kind of guide and help them get there. But just focusing on the content team specifically, I think it's really important to foster a creative environment. And that sounds simple, but if it's too focused on KPIs and objectives, then I think that can be creatively stifling. On the flip side of things, it is really important that we're understanding our contributions as marketers. And so I find myself walking the line, and actually I see that more as my role, right? Is to then take the roll up of all this creative work and figure out what we're driving in terms of engagement with our products and services.
And the point you made about giving people some creative freedom, it's so important. And to be honest, a lot of people say that and then they don't really back it up. So if that's something that you say and back up, which I no reason to think you don't. That's very liberating for people who work for you, and it makes people thrive much more in a job. I always say people want to feel like they're making a difference, and if they're constantly being squashed or being, like you said, it's only about the numbers, and it's not about dreaming a little bit or thinking out of the box. It can be really stifling. So I applaud you for I'm glad that was like the first thing that you said, because that's not always, especially in big companies, that's not always what you hear. What else? What are some other qualities that you need to be good at your job?
I think just for the sports leadership table, I try really hard to put myself in my colleagues' shoes. Whether it be our partnerships lead who has to take the phone calls from an angry partner, or a product manager who's managing, a really heavy dev cycle and a lot of demands on, a finite number of engineers, or, our legal team and the risk and exposure, especially when you look at what we're getting into with betting. I think it's really easy to bring your own perspective to the table, but I think the most, and this is something I've had to learn, and I've tried to observe leaders and how they handle it themselves. But ultimately, I think the most successful executives are able to see the perspectives of everyone around them and everyone around the table.
That's great. And in terms of the content creation, correct me if I'm wrong, but you do have sports journalists who work for Yahoo, right? So you have your own people that work for you and create content, write articles, and break news, and then you also have partners, right? That you bring in content from third parties. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So how do you balance that? So, like, how do you know you have the right number of reporters covering baseball or basketball, or like, how do you balance that versus, hey, I could just use this company third party to do it, and then I don't have to bring in people?
Sure.
The balancing act there and the decision making on that.
Yeah. So when you look at the Yahoo Sports roster, you'll see that we're really, really strong as a team, both in our first party voices all the way through to the strength of our partnerships against the NFL, against the NBA, and against fantasy in particular. Now we're adding betting to that mix, and so when you look at our roster, we have the deepest roster against the NFL, against the NBA, against fantasy, right. And then what I would call longer tail sports. That's where we are more open to aggregation and more open to taking on partner content, because we'll enhance that experience. We'll make sure we can serve you as a fan, but it might not be through our first party voice. So that's traditionally how we've handled it. We also have a quick strike team is what we call it, who is on top of breaking and trending news. And that's proved to be really, really valuable for SEO and social, and winning the battle that is, getting the audience to choose your brand.
Constant battle. Let's pivot a little, because I want to talk about the color commentary and the TV work that you've done. Curious how that came to be and what that experience has been like.
Sure. So when I was still in Washington, D.C., a friend of mine passed my name to, oddly, a Verizon producer who was working on developing the local FiOS channel and game coverage. And so I wound up doing a ton of games for FiOS, covering George Washington, covering Georgetown.
How did they even know to call Sarah Crennan? Like, how did they even know about you as the person?
One of my friends, actually, it was one of my Georgetown classmates, was covering a men's game and offered my name as somebody who would cover the women's game. And so I had never done it before. I had never been on TV before, but I learned and figured it out.
Wow. So you started in the local DC market with FiOS.
Yep.
But you've now done some national coverage too, haven't you?
Yes. So then when I moved to New York City, FiOS they still had a Long Island channel. So I started doing Stony Brook and Hofstra games. And from there, I was referred for actually the national championship. So in 2013, I called the national championship for the NCAA.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Really cool.
Yeah.
And I've also done games for CBS Sports, ESPNU, and I'm missing one. There's one other outlet in addition to the NCAA. So it's been a lot of fun. I love doing it. It's also helped me in my job in working in sports media. So it's been interesting.
You still do it?
Thing. I do it when I have the opportunity to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I'm top of the roster. Actually, another amazing Georgetown graduate, Sheehan Stanwyck Birch, is probably the lead analyst for women's lacrosse, and she does an amazing job.
Yeah. We also have, you have a lot to balance between work and home life. So I can imagine it's a lot to fit in all of that too.
Definitely.
That constant balance and constant issue of balancing, I imagine.
Yes, I've done the America East Conference Championship. That was the most recent game that I called, because Stony Brook has been a top 10 ranked program for the past several years. So
good.
Yeah.
I'd love to ask the question that you and I get often from young Georgetown students or recent alumni or people looking to make a pivot in their career, and which is advice that you have for those folks who want to get into either sports or sports media. What are some of the sort of Sarah Crennan tidbits you can impart today?
Sure.
With advice.
My number one tidbit is to start creating. Anybody who comes in with even an attempt at creating something stands
even if you're like a lawyer or a business person.
Yeah,
you're defining creating loosely, or you're saying more of someone who wants to be like a content person or something.
I guess more a content person, but let me give you an example. There was a networking group that I talked to over the pandemic, and this young girl was like, man, there's so many great women's athletes on my campus. Like, I don't know why anybody hasn't created like the Beyonce of the university. And I'm like, you should do that. Mm-hmm. Like the barrier for entry right now, it's just so low. To create a podcast, it doesn't take much except for your time and creativity. To mm-hmm. create a social channel, to create a video, most people have a phone. You can create. And so to be able to reflect a level of passion and an ability to, create your own lane, I think is really, really valuable. If you're talking more from the corporate sense, I guess a lawyer or a business development person, mm-hmm. I would say just absorb everything you can. Mm-hmm. The pace of media is so fast that if you can display and represent a strong understanding of the media landscape, you'll have the edge up, above the next candidate. And I think companies really value somebody who has a great understanding of who's done what with whom, so that, you skip that education process upon arrival.
What are your thoughts on networking and advice you give in terms of networking and the importance of networking?
I think that networking is, I think LinkedIn has become an incredible tool.
It really is. I was just saying that literally yesterday. What an amazing tool LinkedIn is.
That platform is incredible now. And so, learning how to use LinkedIn to your benefit right now, I think that's a really smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. It's easy to seek out a business podcast, and listen and learn as much as you possibly can. Yep. I'm a big believer in mentorship being informal. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there's so many ways to keep in touch with somebody or to rely on somebody's point of view or perspective. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't always need to be, I'll see you at Tuesday, mm-hmm. On Tuesday at 10 a.m. I think that there are lighter touch ways to kind of build and grow the influences you have on your decision making. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I personally do. Mm-hmm. I try not to, the most precious thing somebody has to offer is their time. Mm-hmm. And so you're more likely to get a response or some kind of tidbit if it's not too much to ask. Yeah. And so that's at least what I've tried to do. And I think that most of the time serves me well because I get, an answer or a nugget of value that helps me make a decision.
Yeah. And when you're interviewing for roles, you mentioned people having a real knowledge of the business and being up on that. That's obviously important. What are some other things you look for when someone's sitting across from you in an interview? What are some of the key things you look for that are making a final decision on a candidate?
Well, to underline that point, a great understanding of our company is really important. And that sounds simple, but a lot of people don't do enough research.
Good
to
advice.
Understand the evolution of a company or a business. And so, naturally, I think anyone will have a leg up. If you come in understanding the media landscape, specifically understanding how a corporation has evolved, I think that's incredibly valuable. Like, just to use a very specific example, if somebody comes in demonstrating an understanding of what Yahoo Sports has done, but also how Yahoo Sports is supporting the larger Verizon initiatives around 5G and connectivity, I will spend far more time and be far more attentive with that candidate.
Yep, that's good. Good advice. Well, good. I think that's actually a good one to end on. Always thinking about our Georgetown students and how to help them. So this is great. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate all the time, and continued good luck with Yahoo Sports. And again, you've done a great job on the content side there. And one of the things that seems really kind of fun and interesting for you is the future is kind of a green field, right? There are so many opportunities out there, and Yahoo's positioned in a way with your big audience too, that you can, like you said, you can really try things and break into new areas. And that must be exciting.
Thank you, Rich. We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
But it's always fun to be able to connect with the alumni base. And, I also try to help whomever I can. So
you've always been very helpful and always been helpful in that way. So good for you. Thank you for that. Terrific. Enjoy the rest of the week.
Awesome.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. Take care.